Hey everyone, welcome to our Thursday talk here at DaVinci Week. We're back again. Today we're going to be talking about tracking student progress. I am Austin Rutledge, and I am joined today by Alexis Rossi, our Chief Academic Officer. Alexis, I will turn it over to you if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this morning and talk to you about tracking student progress. As Austin said, I'm the Chief Academic Officer here at DaVinci Education, and I'm really excited about what we have to show you today.
So hopefully that solves any of those glitches. I think there are some artifacts showing up on the screen somewhere. So love living in the Zoom world, but we are excited to be here with you today. And today we're going to be talking about, as I said, tracking student progress. And so some of the things that we'll be going over are, really getting into some of the features that are available within Leo, how to use the Leo Gradebook, categories, matrices in the Leo Gradebook, really talking about communicating student performance to students, but also being aware of how students are doing within Leo. And then Alexis is also going to get into things that you can see in the academic portrait, some new features that we have that we think you're really going to like, and talk a little bit more about data visualization as well in terms of supporting and facilitating student success. So one thing I do want to let you know about is that in terms of logistics, if you have questions for today, we do have a Poll Everywhere Q&A embedded in the event today. So just if you're in Leo, just scroll down right where you are, and you should see that ability to enter in those questions that you might have. And then we also have the discussion board going as well. So if you just click on discussions, again, don't do that right now because you'll leave the video, you'll leave the live stream, but feel free to go over to those discussions and feel free to reply to any existing threads or even create a new topic if you want to do so. And then, just as a note, like all of our sessions this week, the recordings will be available. All recordings up to yesterday afternoon should be online already. So we might actually refer back to some of those today in our presentation. So feel free to go back and check those out. If there's something you missed or you were there, but maybe you didn't hear that mentioned or whatever. So feel free to go back and check those out. So without further ado, let's kind of dig into today's topic, talking about student progress. And what do we mean by student progress? Well, really, with regards to knowing, kind of getting this complete picture of how students are doing within your academic program. So we're talking about evaluating students based on their performance, but also having the ability to track and visualize that progress. And we think that is really, really important and something that we know that we're going to continually place an emphasis on down the road as we continue to add new features to Leo. I know that the ability to see where students are and hopefully get that picture, that idea of where they've been, where they are, and where they're going to hopefully, and see that student growth over time. And so when we talk about student growth or student performance, another thing to recognize is that we're not just talking about what students know, but we're also talking about what they can do. And forever we've been assessing what students know, right? That's something that's I think in higher education especially, we've really figured that part out. We've learned how to create high stakes exams. And, we've learned a lot about the types of questions that you should use on those exams as well. I know many of you that have been in higher ed a long time have seen those questions that have been utilized on things like the USMLE Step 1 or the COMLEX exam. You've seen those types of questions evolve over time. But one thing that is becoming increasingly important is that we are aware and can track what students can do. How do they apply what they know? And so that's one of the things that we're certainly focused on with Leo, helping you to solve that problem. And I think one of the ways, and we'll get to this later on, but Alexis will be talking about evaluations and how evaluations and themes can help to solve some of those problems. So as I mentioned, I think I already mentioned assessment. And, this is really a prerequisite. If you want to track student progress, you have to, assess the students in some way. And so that is one of the things that, we start with in Leo. And as we talked about on Tuesday, Dan Thompson and I, so feel free to go back later, check that one out if you missed it. But Dan talked a lot about formative assessment and, what can you do to help students know where they are, help students assess themselves, as well as get feedback from the students about what they know and maybe what they don't know. We gave quite a few tips on how to do that, ways that you can utilize Leo to do that as well. And so I think a really good, and yesterday, if you tuned in, a really good assessment strategy, our assessment panel talked about this some as well, is having plans for some type of formative assessment within your curriculum, within your learning events, even within, thinking about specific learning objectives that you might be addressing in those events. So thinking about how are you going to formatively assess those students. And, some of the tools, we're using Poll Everywhere today for Q&A. There are other ways that you can, bring in third-party tools. We talked a lot this week about LTI and our increased LTI capabilities. But using those tools within Leo to help students get a picture of where they are so they can start to see an image, an idea of their own progress as well. One of my favorite things is the ability to, just drop short quizzes into Leo. And I know in the future we want to look at we've already started mapping things like evaluation questions to themes. And so when we have those themes mapped to these questions, we can start to see incrementally the growth that students might be experiencing because we're tracking those questions right within Leo. So I mentioned formative assessment, which is certainly an important component of any assessment strategy. But our panel yesterday, if you were able to tune into that, also talked a lot about summative assessment. And I think that this is also very important. One of the analogies that I really like to use is to think about the idea of formative assessment are these steps, on the rungs of a ladder. And that summative assessment is also very important. We don't want to negate the significance of that formative assessments, tool or whatever that might be. But the way that I've actually had it explained to me that really made a lot of sense was that, by the time students get to that point, by the time they get to the top of that ladder, there shouldn't be too many surprises, right? Those formative assessment points that, they participated in along the way, those points of growth, hopefully growth, are going to show students moving up that ladder. And by the time they get to that summative assessment, there should be a pretty good idea of where that student is in terms of his or her performance and what they know and what they can do. And so what you really want to be paying attention to, and I think one of the things that, with these new tools in Leo that you'll be able to do is you'll be able to see if a student is falling off that trajectory or if they are, all of a sudden, they were kind of on this growth trend and all of a sudden they're way up here or they're way down here. And so those are the things that would be kind of interesting and things that you would want to pay attention to and learn more about and see, what's going on. Did he or she find, some great way to kind of overcome something that they were struggling with before, or, oh gosh, they really dropped off here on the summative assessment. What's going on? Are there study practices or, was something going on with them personally that maybe they didn't perform as well? So these are some of the things that we're hoping to help you guys with in terms of tracking student progress in Leo. All right. So like I was saying, with in terms of tracking student progress, now going to that next slide, there are multiple ways within certain events in Leo that you can do things like this. And so you see here a screenshot of discussions. And so this is a very qualitative way of tracking student progress. Obviously you're going to be able to see based upon student responses, what they're communicating to you. And one of the great things about discussions is that you can add them in events, as we've done here with our event today. You can also add discussions to course sections, like to the entire course section. So, you can imagine this can be broken apart by small groups, because those small groups might be participating in events by themselves. But you might also have like an entire course discussion within an event or within a course section. And one thing that I really love that we've added within the last year is the ability to create those student discussions across course sections. And so what I mean by that is if you have, a pediatrics clerkship, for example, you can have students in multiple rotations of that clerkship at multiple campuses participating in discussions across those course sections. And one of the great things too about these discussions now, Alexis, if you want to go on to the next slide, is that you can score those discussions. And so you can go ahead and enter in a score for each student as well as a comment. And if you were with us on Tuesday, you heard me talk a lot about comments. I think comments are really important in terms of providing feedback for students. And one of the really awesome things I think about these comments, these scores and these comments are going to go right into the gradebook. If you see, kind of right there at the top left of the screenshot, you can export all this right into the course gradebook. And that will be extremely helpful because those comments now will also show up in the academic portrait, as you're going to see in just a little bit. And so, bringing all that information from across Leo and kind of helping to build a, better picture of, where that student is at a single point in time is going to be really helpful. Going on to the next slide, those comments, for those of you that have used assignments in Leo, you're aware that those comments exist there as well. And if you haven't used assignments in Leo, I would encourage you to think about how you might utilize those to, again, to provide feedback for your students. And so again, you see a comment entered here for this student, for this assignment. That comment's going to go into the gradebook and then, show up in that academic portrait for that student's mentor. Or, what we often see as well, in addition to providing mentors access to a student's academic portrait, a lot of schools are also, they have certain individuals, maybe it's a dean of curriculum or a dean of students or whatever that role might be, but they are providing access for those individuals, somebody on a student success committee, for example, access to all of the student portraits. And so, it's almost like they have the students that they might advise, but they can also see all of the other students because of their role as a dean of curriculum or dean of students. So, that allows those individuals to, go into those student portraits and see how they're doing on specific assignments, see those comments that have been entered. And then, when they meet with that student in their office, they have a much, better picture of what's going on in that student's academic journey. So on to the next slide. Yeah, thanks, Alexis. I mentioned LTI earlier, and this is one of the LTI tools I'm really excited about Leo being able to integrate with, and that's as you can see on this slide, Turnitin. Turnitin is for those of you that might not be familiar with that. It's a third-party tool, but they allow you to kind of do like a check on student submissions, student papers, for example, that they might submit as assignments. It checks for plagiarism. It actually, you can have assignments go into a repository. And so like it checks from year to year. So if the same paper gets turned in 2 years in a row, it will alert you to that. There's all kinds of things like that. And so, but it's also, as you can see, those scores and those grades from Turnitin can go right into the Leo Gradebook as well. And so one of the cool new features of being able to track student progress using multiple tools, but I'll have it come right back into Leo. So on the next slide, beyond just the LTI integrations, and Leo has actually had this for a long time, and I'm not sure how many people utilize this feature or not, or if they, hopefully, if you're not utilizing the ability to do simple imports for external assignments, you see this and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's not too hard. We can do that. And so what you see here is an assignment in the gradebook, and you can see here there's an icon, kind of like a disc with a green arrow pointing down. So that icon, when you click there, you get this screen that allows you to import a CSV file that can upload student scores from really any third-party tool that you might have. I know in the past, and personally working with medical school students, we used a different platform for exams. And so we would take those exam scores, we could actually export the scores from that platform. And we had a simple CSV file. And then we actually even had a different identification in that other, like they had, one number that was their ID in Leo and a different number that was their ID in another platform. And the students were unaware of these identification numbers is something our IT department had set up. But because that was the case, we actually set up an alternate ID in Leo so that we didn't even have to do any manipulation of that information. If you see on this screen here where it says user ID source, we could actually select that user ID from the other platform to upload those scores. And so that made it so easy then to export the scores from one, and then with the click of just a few buttons, really, we could go ahead and import those scores here. And then as you can see, if you're doing this for small groups, you can also, there are tools for importing the scores for individual students and have them apply to those small group sets. I think, Alexis, if you go one more, if you advance one more, you'll see we kind of blown up this part of the screen so that you can see really that import is 3 columns. It's that Leo ID or alternate ID, like I mentioned, whatever the score might be, and then the comment field. And again, that comment field I think is really important. If there are comments coming from that third-party tool, they can also go straight into your gradebook for students to see, for mentors to see, for administrators to see. Again, helping to create that full picture of student performance. So I'm going to kind of pause here talking a little bit about team-based learning and then hand it off to Alexis. But I also want to point out too, I know one of our panelists yesterday, Dr. Hart from Oklahoma State University Center for Health Sciences, he talked about utilizing team-based learning, and Leo provides those tools to do that as well as some tools to kind of track and see how those teams have done within those team-based learning events. And so those scores, again, are also going to go straight into the gradebook. And so we feel like, providing all these tools to, score students on assessments, quizzes, exams, assignments, as you've seen, as well as bring in those scores and their performance in those third-party tools, along with all those comments, is really important in creating that, big picture of student academic performance. And Alexis is going to talk to you more about the academic portrait. And I know this afternoon, we're going to be, our team is going to be here to show you in our Leo lab more about the academic portrait and how to set that up. So Alexis, I'll hand it over to you. But again, for those of you that haven't noticed, if you scroll down, if you have any questions about anything today, please use that Q&A. And Alexis, I'll let you take over.
Thank you so much, Austin. So as Austin was talking a lot about what we tend to see in the preclinical curriculum, of course, things like assignments and grades can be in the clinical curriculum as well, but we want to shift focus a little bit and show you some of the ways that you can track student progress in the clinical environment. And so our patient encounter tracking is one of those elements that you can utilize. Here, a student can put in the diagnosis, the level of participation. So for example, if they're just observing, if they're doing something, so thinking about those milestones, particularly for EPAs, they can be put in also the specific procedure or procedures and the encounter type. So looking at if it's inpatient, if it's ambulatory, et cetera. So there's a lot of ways that students can track the types of patients that they're seeing, where they're seeing those patients, to what extent they're participating, and then also the diagnosis and procedures that were in that clinical encounter. And so what's really nice about this is that a student can track that in one particular clerkship, so one course, and across clerkships. So you can really get a sense for what are students encountering within their clinical years across all of those different types of clerkships, whether you're integrated or not. Additionally, course directors have the opportunity to be able to set core patient encounters. So you can set, for example, specific diagnoses that you want to make sure that the students are encountering, or procedures that they're doing. So you can be able to track that by clerkship, and then students can see that longitudinally across all of their clerkships for years 3 and 4, for example, or if you're utilizing it for an LIC even before that. And you can see where you've achieved those goals within that clerkship, or just in general, kind of across the curricula. So this is a really nice way to be able to make sure that students are actually encountering those learning experiences that you want them to encounter. This could be utilized for standardized patient encounters as well. So to get students used to the process, there's an option to put notes in, kind of mirroring an EMR in a sense, but not actually having to do it or set up a dummy system. So there's a lot of different ways that you can utilize this, both for formative assessment in preclinical and clinical years. Also, evaluations are crucial. We talked a lot about that earlier this week. So Dan and Austin showed us a little bit more about how to utilize those evaluations. Our assessment panel talked a lot about evaluations as well. And on Monday, Fitz mentioned rubrics were one of the things that came out this year. So with rubrics, there's really a lot that you can do here. It's complete flexibility for you to develop your scale the way that you want it in terms of those specific values. We've seen schools do on the whole value and also on the half. So there's a lot of different ways that you can track that. And it's really being able to then apply this in evaluations either on their own, so this can be the only question type, or in combination with other types of scales. So there's a lot you can do here. You can also make comments available as well. You can see on the screen here that there's a comment section at the bottom. So there's a lot of different ways that you can put the data in here and utilize rubrics for your EPA workplace-based type of assessment. There's other ways that you can utilize the evaluations as well. So in one of the discussions in DaVinci Week, we see that we have some client partners asking about utilizing these in OSCEs. That would be a great way for faculty to get used to doing it, but also students to start to get used to that feedback. It's also a wonderful way to take the data and start to put it into the portrait. And I'll be showing you how to do that in a moment in terms of what it ends up looking like, especially if you have your evaluation questions tagged with those themes that Austin was talking about a moment ago, and how important that data can be for formative assessment and feedback for your students. Interestingly, too, this is a little known fact, but it's something that Austin and I get pretty jazzed about because it's something unique to Leo in a way. And I'll let Austin jump in if I miss anything in a moment. But what's really neat about the Leo evals is if you have an NA option for a question, the student is not penalized if an evaluator chooses NA. So what ends up happening is, say you have 10 questions, say a faculty member or a preceptor clicks NA for one of them, the student is still going to be scored for 100%, but out of 9 questions instead of 10. So in that sense, it's a unique score for that student. They're all getting scored in terms of 100%. You're not being penalized by getting an NA for a particular question. Austin, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, Alexis, you're totally right. Like this was something that I didn't even realize right away with Leo until one day I noticed where it says, it gives you this report on the custom max possible points. And that's really powerful because you can have those, I know in clinical settings for a lot of evaluations, there are things that you might ask an evaluator about, But as you can imagine, in a clinical setting, it's going to be very different from patient to patient. And so the evaluator might not observe a certain activity or a certain procedure, or something might not be applicable to that patient encounter. So if the evaluator can't score a student on that, they don't have to just give automatically give them all the points. They can just choose that NA option. And so then, as you can see here, for example, you have a student who they got 10 out of 10, even though in the evaluation, some students might have been scored out of 15 points. This student was only scored out of 10 points because there was one question that NA was selected. And so that student wasn't penalized for that. They were still scored out of the max possible points for that student. So that's where you see whenever you hover over those grades in Leo, you'll get that information about the custom max possible points for that student, which I think is really helpful.
And if you have any questions about that, please throw it into the poll and we'll be sure to answer those. Thank you, Austin. So how does this all come together? It comes together in the academic portrait. You have your grade book. If you're a faculty member in that course or a course director, you can see all of the information in that grade book, but that doesn't necessarily help when you're looking at a systemic or a system-based wide idea of assessment and how you're getting feedback back to the students. Because if you're just keeping everything in the grade book, then your mentors, your advisors don't necessarily have access to that information, and then they can't be proactive in supporting that student. So that's why the academic portrait can be so powerful, because you have personal information about the student, you have notes, you have all the evaluation data, and I'll show you how cool that looks with the themes in a moment, but then you also have much more about their grades, and this is coming soon as well. Just highlighting what Fitz had said on Monday is that you have all of this different type of information, but you're about to get a lot more as well. So when all of these things that Austin and I are talking about in terms of bringing in grades into the grade book through your discussions, through your assignments from other vendors like ExamSoft, importing those scores, that's going to show up in the academic portrait for your mentors and your advisors for your students. So you'll be able to track based on when a last snapshot was taken in a course, what percent of an overall score that student has. If based on your grade matrix, they are having honors or high honors or pass or fail or however that you've developed that. But then you'll also be able to take something which I've really appreciated in our gradebook and see that in a much more visual way. And that's our categories. So categories are a very flexible tool that can help you build the gradebook that you want. If you have an integrated course curricula and you're looking at, okay, even though we're on module 1, we still have anatomy, we still have biochem, we still have physiology, and we want to be able to see how a student's performing in a particular aspect of that module. And so here you can develop your categories in that way. You can have critical pass where they have to pass the anatomy component or they have to pass the exam component of that course in order to move forward. And so not just that, but then you'll be able to see these assignments here or these evaluations and how a student is performing based on that. So in this screenshot, you can see that the categories are based on type of assignment. That's certainly a valid way to organize your gradebook, but we do tend to also see the gradebooks organized by type of content as well, so that you can see where a student might need additional support. So there's a lot that can be done here in terms of tracking progress and being able to see where a student is performing in certain areas. And I am going to jump into our system here in a moment and show you this live so you can see how these charts change based on the themes, based on the feedback that a student is getting in their evaluations. And this is really exciting for me because we all know that, as Austin said, there are different aspects of assessment, and there are good days, there are bad days, there might be an assessor who's more of a hawk or more of a dove, and you want to be able to account for these things. So as we've talked with other client partners in the past, the idea of flexibility of data has come up a lot, and really being able to see by theme, by area, how a student's performing, but then also being able to have the flexibility to have data points in or out of that and see what happens from there. So not only are you going to be able to see longitudinal trends in terms of performance over time, but you're also going to be able to manipulate this chart in the way that you want to see it. And another option for this is by assessor. So you can see a theme by one particular assessor. You can see a theme by course. And I mention assessor because, for example, you could be utilizing student self-assessments or peer evaluations as well. And then you can choose that you only want to see how you thought you compared. And then you can also look at maybe how a particular assessor rated you. So this is going to be really important when we're talking especially about workplace-based assessments and being able to utilize this for EPAs, but also in the preclinical curriculum, you can do this by content area and be able to then down here at the bottom, it shows where those questions were, the exact course, et cetera. And a student can utilize that for studying for step 1 or the NBOME, and you see their progress, identify an area that maybe they're not performing in the way that they want to or that they expect to, and go right into the study materials. So this is going to be very powerful. And I am going to stop sharing our slide screen, and I'm going to jump into our system so that you can see how this looks once it's all set up. Okay, so if you can't see my screen, please let me know. But one of the things that I really want to be able to show you is, so you still have your portrait looking the way that you expect with your student's picture and information, including their primary program and affiliation. We mentioned on Monday about the pronouns, so you have that if a student has chosen to display that. Here's those academics in terms of your active courses that I was mentioning a moment ago. You can see where there's a matrix in terms of pass or fail, but you can also get a score if you wanted to. It really depends on how you want to set those up. And then you also have access to past courses as well. But I know that we're all excited to see themes, or at least I am. So this is what it looks like when you're seeing all of the ratings on a particular student across any theme. So this is their general performance. You can see that it varies quite a lot. And what you want to be able to do is drill down. So if we're looking, for example, at a specific EPA, I set these up as theme sets and collections. So I have EPAs here in terms of 1 through 6, just to show you. And then I also put in an EPA set full so that you have access to those key functions. So it'll really be about how much do you want to drill down? Are you rating a student based on the EPA as a whole, or are you rating them on each individual key function that makes up that EPA? And that's one of the great things about themes is it's so flexible. You have those 3 different levels, so you can do what you want with it. And I'll show you how this looks across both of those areas. So let's look at just if you're rating on an rubric EPA just in general. So let's look at EPA 1. We can see that the performance level is completely different if we're looking at just one specific EPA than if we're looking at everything over time. So again, here's your history and physical for EPA 1. The student's performing really well, above average in terms of, a 3rd or a 4th year student. Usually we look at level 3 in terms of graduation, and then you expect your residents to be at 4 or 5 in terms of trustability. However, we know that some schools are utilizing the entire 5-point scale. So it's really up to you and where you want to see your students performing, and then how you're doing that faculty development around this. But you have a really good performance right now in terms of EPA 1. If you look at EPA 6, we can see here that there's some ratings that are really low. We want to be able to see, okay, what's going on there? Is it maybe the evaluator? So let's see, let's go ahead and take some off. Well, if we take that data point off, you can see here on January 8th, that point went up. we can add it back in, and we can see that it goes down. So there's a lot that you can do here to kind of see where your student's performing and maybe why. We see that, for example, this evaluator is rating this student pretty low in terms of a 1 on these 2 different occasions, but we also see that there's 2 different evaluators here. And if we're comparing this evaluation data here with the one over here, we can see that it's the same evaluator. So it's not necessarily that that evaluator is consistently rating that student low at a 1, but that maybe it was something about that encounter. Maybe it was something about that day. And you have specific data points that then you can come in and you can talk to your student and say, hey, what's going on? You also have your theme over here. I'm going to highlight it. So we're in EPA 6, but importantly, you have the evaluation name, so you can really pinpoint which evaluation it was, particularly if you have students having a lot of evaluations at once. You can see which course or rotation it's in. So we're making sure that we're only looking at PEDS right now. You can see that here. And really importantly, you can see what question it is. So if you know your rating scales, you know your evaluation templates and forms, you can say, hey, I know what question 5 was on. That's where they struggled with X, Y, and Z. So there's a lot that you can do here to be able to see how your students are performing. This is on a general EPA. We have some schools that are utilizing this and looking just at the EPA overall. However, we also recognize that there are key functions that make up an EPA, and maybe in standardized patient encounters or maybe even in the workplace-based assessment, you want to be able to see exactly which component of that EPA the student might be struggling with. So let's go into my other theme set here, where I have the EPAs full. That's what I named my collection. My set is EPA 2, prioritize a differential diagnosis. And then I have my key functions as the themes. And that is what I have mapped to my evaluation questions. So I can look at how is the student engaging and communicating with their team members? Again, pretty good. Actually, this is consistent with how they're doing in terms of EPA 6. We still have this really low rating down here. We see that it's the same day, January 11th. Maybe they just had a really off day. Maybe as their advisor, you know that they got some bad news, that maybe a family member was exposed to COVID, because that was our reality at the time. And so you can really be able to utilize this information to then assess how the student's doing, reach out, be proactive about it. Also, in terms of I mentioned content areas. So we have some theme sets here that we've decided to tag our curricula, tag some of our eval questions with particular content areas that are important for step 1. You can do this with your MBOME blueprint as well. And I did one on communication and professionalism because we track that a lot in medical school, especially the idea of professionalism. You can separate these out. This is just demo data, but I did want to show you. If you're looking by particular themes, whether it's content or whether it's professional behaviors, you can also track this because you can tag an evaluation question with more than one theme. So you can have your content area on there, but then if that content area is about communication, say again, it's engaging and communicating with your team members for your EPA key functions, you can also tag that with your professionalism tag. And when you're looking at how is this student have any professionalism issues longitudinally, you can see that. We can see that overall they're relatively high at 3 points or more on a 5-point scale, but we do see some very significant dips in terms of a 1. Ones by a lot of our standards might be unacceptable, that they were unprofessional that day. You can target that, see what happened, talk to that student, talk to their team, and do some proactive feedback that can really then help them move forward. So I know that we're getting close to the time of the end of our session today. So I do want to pause and see if we have any questions so far.
It does look like we had one person asking about the themes. And I know, Alexis, you have talked a lot about themes already. And I love how fluid and easy it is to go in and filter those and how it's organized by different theme sets. So I guess the question was, are you going to cover setting up themes this afternoon? I know that you were going to focus some on the academic portrait. I didn't know if you're going to get into themes or not.
That's a great question. And yes, so we'll be talking this afternoon about how to turn on some of these tabs or menus, submenus in the academic portrait. We'll go into themes a little bit so I can show you, based on the example that I have on this tab, how to set up those different theme collections and those different theme sets, how you can have multiple collections and multiple sets. You can tag your eval questions with multiple themes. And then really it then can depend on what you want to show up here and how you want to track student progress in association also with how you're tracking and tagging your curricula. So we will be getting into that a little bit more this afternoon, but if there's a specific question that you all want to see in this session, please just throw it in that poll and we can address it.
Alexis, one thing that as you were showing this, I was thinking about, a lot of this has been focused on thinking about the clinical years, but as you were showing some of those theme sets that were from the USMLE blueprint, and thinking about the didactic years, and thinking about, well, where could those show up, and thinking about being able to map evaluation questions to themes. I know a lot of schools are using problem-based learning, team-based learning, or clinical problem-solving scenarios where they are working in small groups. And typically, at least in my experience, they are having those facilitators evaluate those 6 or however many students they might have in their small group. And I think that's a perfect place where you can start to provide more, to start to quantify some of those things that, in the past, I mentioned earlier, we might only have qualitative data for certain things, but using these evaluation questions, you can assess students on their medical knowledge as it pertains to those clinical scenarios and how they participate in their group, their professionalism, their communication, all of those things that are a component of that step 1 blueprint, thinking about those didactic years, and you can track those. I know you might not have any of that data in here in the system, but you can start to see how are they doing in terms of their knowledge of the cardiovascular system over time. I think that'll be really powerful too.
And it can be part of your CQI process, right? So that's why I left this up as it's blank. So if the cardiovascular system, again, this is just an example, but if this is important to you, if you've tagged it in your curricular map and you have your themes in different events, but then you notice that there's no data here, it's because we didn't assess this student in this area. So from that perspective, in terms of a curricular dean or a curricular committee or a course director, I can see, well, I'm teaching this, I'm saying that it's important, but maybe I haven't assessed it. And so you can identify gaps in this way as well. So it's not just in terms of how this can be utilized as an important way to assess and get feedback on students, but also an important way to assess and get feedback on your program and your content. Maybe Lucy's not the only one who's getting 1s here or 0.5s, in terms of EPA 6. And then you can take a step back and evaluate your system, again, that systems-based approach to assessment, and think about, are we missing something when we're teaching this? Maybe the evaluation question isn't relevant or isn't valid or reliable in the way that we expect it to be. So you can start to see those patterns across your curricula, particularly if you're a mentor or, as you mentioned earlier today, Austin, that student affairs dean or somebody in a similar type of role who has access to multiple portraits across different types of cohorts. You can utilize this data to think about how your assessment of a student is connected to your curriculum map and if there are any gaps there. So there's a lot of different ways you can use this, even when you don't have data in the screen.
Yeah, and I love that you point that out. And then also thinking too about, just where themes could be headed within Leo. And, right now you have the ability to map themes to events and courses and evaluation questions. But I know that like we are looking at, creating the capability to map themes to even more areas of the system. And so that you can even begin to, I think that we're probably going to learn a lot from you all, from the users of Leo, about how you can do, what all you can do with this. Because I know there's probably a lot of, people whose brains are spinning right now, and they're thinking of ideas of how to utilize this capability to, like you said, identify gaps, as well as, what we've demonstrated here is to, see trends in student progress or growth.
Absolutely. So do we have any other questions in our poll? Anyone want me to show you something here, or have Austin and I address a particular content area?
Yeah, just it looks like a couple questions more about, what we're seeing on the screen. One question about the blue icon over there in the top right, I guess, is the one that they're talking about. If you scroll up, Alexis, yeah, I'm guessing that's the one. There's also the blue check boxes, but that one, the one you're on right now, is you can download the chart. I believe that's an image of that graph. And so we wanted to provide that as a capability for, to download that, snapshot point in time of student progress. I know that things, charts for student progress and growth like this can be used, in other areas of the academic portrait. I think you guys might talk some about that this afternoon, how you can download those images and use them in other places. And then there was another question about asking if we could zoom in so we can see all the tabs on the left-hand side of the academic portrait. So, yeah. Perfect. Hopefully this will help. So, and I know Alexis is going to talk more about this in our Leo Lab session this afternoon, all the different areas of the academic portrait. But there are highlights, kind of just an overview of that student. That's where you can see kind of some basic information, send a message to the student, themes, where we are now, academics, which is what Alexis showed you earlier. So you can see their performance in various courses, their attendance. And again, all these, I think, are, all of these are enabled. You can enable or disable certain ones depending on how you use this at your institution. Evaluations, so students can see all of their evaluations. If you were with us yesterday afternoon, we talked about on-demand evaluations and how students can access those evaluations to get auto-approved. Not only can they get those results in their email, but they can access those right here in the academic portrait. So students can see that feedback pretty quickly. There's the notes tab. So this is an area that's, again, pretty flexible in that students and mentors, administrators, whoever has access to the student portrait, and you do have control over who has access to the student portrait, can create notes and leave notes here, notes for everyone to see, or private notes so that only faculty and administration can see it and the student doesn't see it. And then moving down the list, we have the About tab. So this is where, and this is also a very, very flexible area. You can determine, this is an example of the About tab that we've created for this system, but you can create as many different sets of information and fields of information as you want here. And so information that you might want mentors to be able to access, or administrators, things like that. All of that is easily uploadable. The next tab is the portfolio. So this is, again, very customizable. That's one of the highlights, I think, of the academic portrait, is how customizable it is to your institution. So students can upload documents. Documents can be uploaded by mentors if there's forms or things like that that students need to fill out and complete. And then the last one is the characteristics, or noteworthy characteristics. And so this is where students and mentors, administrators can collaborate on characteristics, things that they've done in preparation for those MSPE letters that they'll be completing during their medical career. So.
Thank you, Austin, for such a great overview. I did also want to point out a couple of best practices here based on the evaluations as well. So I know that Austin's before, but when you're looking at tagging those themes across evaluation, remember that you can use that same evaluation form in multiple different places. So you can have a professionalism evaluation and you can utilize it in every single course from day one. And then you can really track how that student is doing in that area across everything. For your clinical rotations, you can have evaluation forms that have the relevant EPAs for a particular course or a particular clerkship, but you can also have, an overview one that you have in every single rotation so that you can track over time. And even if you're utilizing different eval forms, as long as you're tagging the relevant questions with the same theme, that data will come into this. So you'll be able to see, again, we've seen like history and physical, the students rated pretty consistently across the board. Again, too, I also want to point out that if you're looking at these entrustable professional activities, these EPAs, you have your EPA here of prioritize a differential diagnosis, but then you also have those key functions. So now with that ability to have the themes at the 3 levels and to be able to tag that individual theme to an eval question, you can either do just the EPA or you can have those key functions. The AAMC has all of this here. There's downloadable forms. So if you're not already using EPAs, you have all of these toolkits for the first 13. And then there's a ton of other things, a toolkit based on each EPA, but also your EPA pilot project guides and a number of different scholarly articles. And you can search the scholarly literature and they update that pretty regularly. And it gives you all of the articles that are related to EPA. So if you're thinking about, but you haven't yet started tracking student performance in EPAs, then this is something that you can think about how to utilize that. Maybe start with your content areas and then move forward. There's a lot of different things that you can do here. And so I did just want to show you those tabs and what they could be useful for as you're thinking about different ways to implement your competency-based education.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that too, that's a really great point about, that you can use the eval forms over and over. Another thing that I would point out too that, you can add is multiple themes to those eval questions. You're not just limited to, a single theme per evaluation question. So for example, you were talking about those key functions for EPA 1. Well, you might have questions that have one of those key function themes associated with it, but all of the questions on that form have EPA 1 associated with it. And so that you can, get those multiple data points on EPA 1, but then you can drill down and see the data points that related to just this one part of EPA 1. And so I think that will be really important. And like I said, I'm really excited to see how you all, the Leo users, the world of Leo users out there are going to utilize this, because I think that while we have some pretty good ideas, I know you guys have a lot more great ideas. And so I think it'll be fun to see how this is useful and how you guys can use this.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to enter into more conversations with you all. If you want to set up a call, please go through our regular channels in terms of putting in a ticket or a meeting request. We'd be happy to explore how to help you utilize this. And going back to your first point, Austin, again, about being able to tag evaluation questions with multiple themes, that's exactly what I did here. So I have, the general EPA theme set with 1 through 6 written down, but then I also had a theme set for each EPA that goes into those key functions. So I tagged some of those questions with both of these or elements of both of them. And so that's how I was able to bring in so many data points from just 1 or 2 eval forms that were then utilized multiple times within that clerkship. So that's just, I wanted to point that out because I thought that was a great example of how you can utilize themes in many different ways. Do we have any other questions before we tell you what's coming up next this week?
I think we are good right now, but if you do have any other questions, feel free to hop into the discussion board for our event today, and we'll be happy to interact and respond to you there and continue the conversation.
And I know that we've mentioned this a couple of times, that the Leo Lab this afternoon is the academic portrait, but also looking ahead for tomorrow. I mentioned professional development and how important it is that you're getting a shared mental mindset around how you're evaluating or what you're tagging in terms of these themes. So we'll also be doing a professional development panel on Friday that will be talking about different client partners' experiences with professional development for Leo and how they've pulled their faculty, staff, and students in and taught them or oriented them to Leo in different ways. For those of you who are client partners, we have another Leo Lounge networking session. Please feel free to join you. We haven't had too many show up, so the lounge isn't crowded. So there's plenty of space for everybody. We're being able to have some really great water cooler style conversations and just get to know each other a little bit better and answer any questions people have as well. So please feel free to stop by, say hello, have some coffee and conversation with us. And then the last Leo Lab of the week is going to be focusing on building a student orientation course. So, all of this stuff that we're showing you is fantastic, but if people don't know how to use it, then it's not going to be helpful. So we're talking to you about the different ways that you can orient students to Leo, help teach them maybe at different points in their academic career, the various relevant aspects or features of Leo that they'll be utilizing. And you can do that from anywhere. So this can be virtual, this can be hybrid, so students complete it before coming into an in-person orientation course. And if you have it in Leo, students can access it at any time for a refresher. So that's an important piece to cover. And we'll also be sharing some exciting news around our faculty orientation course modules that we'll be sharing with you soon. So please join us for the rest of DaVinci Week. And if you have any questions, comments, please throw that into the discussion, as Austin mentioned. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today.